Well, welcome everybody. Please, if you can, put your cameras on. We like friendly faces and lots of interaction. Welcome to Reimagining Careers Education for November. We are racing towards the end of the year. We might squeeze another one in December, but we are super excited about today's paper and discussion. Before we start, my name's Liv Penny. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Become. And we love these just to bring this community of passionate careers educators and people involved in career development together, just to discuss what's topical, what's new, the evidence base, and help each other keep raising the bar in this space, and who believe how powerful and understand how powerful this work can be. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, from wherever we are, and their connections to land, sea, and community. Pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Without further ado, Jim Bright is supposed to be joining us, but he was lurking somewhere in cyberspace, so he might join us soon. But I'm
Jim
delighted.
Bright has joined you.
Oh, you're here. Somewhere. There you go. So Jim is here. Hi, Jim.
Hello.
We've done lots of pre-prep for this, obviously. Hi. And we're delighted to welcome from Monash, Dr. Jo Gleeson today.
Thanks, Liv. Thanks for having me.
No, pleasure. We've been hounding Dr. Gleeson to come on and to talk with us all about this since about 3 months before the paper even launched, haven't we? I think you released a snippet of statistics who latched onto it and said, you have to come and talk to us. It's so aligned to what we're interested in, what everyone's passionate about, and we know how many people will be interested in this data. So really excited to have you here and be able to quiz you. We've got some questions and discussion points we're obviously really interested to talk to you about, but I know that everybody here will also have questions. So we will get straight into it. Firstly, for anyone who hasn't downloaded the paper, it's called Young Women Choosing Careers, Who Decides? I'll leave that QR link there for a second, just for anyone who hasn't downloaded it yet, so that you remember to read it afterwards. Just to tell us a little bit, I know you've got two kind of hats that you wear at Monash, Jo, so just give us a little background about your work and the work of the centre there at Monash.
Sure. Well, the centre, it's actually newly formed. It was created at the beginning of last year. So it's directed by Professor Lucas Walsh, for any of you online who is familiar with Lucas or his work. And the centre's really focused on examining and communicating issues that affect young people. And in so doing, it's trying to influence policy and education practice, trying to just start a conversation or continue conversations about addressing youth disadvantage in particular. So the centre, for instance, last year, commenced a youth barometer research study. So we draw on that youth barometer to examine issues that are pertinent to young people, like food security or the support of queer youth in schools or in health contexts, career education, adolescent career identity, you name it. We sort of will look at anything.
So what was it that sparked this particular paper?
Well, this research is actually my own PhD research that I've been sitting on for a while, actually. And in a way, I'm glad I sat on it. I didn't do that deliberately. It was just life got in the way. But the study was actually done in 2018, so it's pre-COVID. And I think that some of the issues coming out in this paper in particular, if you overlay a lens of COVID, it's probably even worse than what the paper indicates in some places. But yes, no, this is my beloved PhD research suddenly coming to light. And Lucas and I were just always fascinated by the themes that were coming out about young women. So we chose those themes as the first to bring out of the research.
And I know it's recently published, but how's it gone? How's it been received?
Yeah, no, look, it's getting a lot of attention. I think because, a lot of people, you're either even if you're not an academic, you might be a parent that has got, teenage daughters that are going through school or that are going through university. You might be in a school yourself. You might be a careers advisor. There's a lot of appeal in this data. I was just saying before we came online, we actually presented to the Australian Association of Graduate Employers last week. And so if you're an employer, there's interest in this data as well. So I think the data is just, it's got a lot of appeal for different groups of people. It's compelling too, right? Like I still look at some of the data and I go, hell, that's a worry, and I, I'm a mother myself, I'm an academic, I'm a careers counsellor, from a whole lot of perspectives, I'm worried about the data. So I think that's why it's getting a lot of attention both here in Australia and also internationally, which is great because what we want, I think what we all want online is to create conversation about improving the careers education and career development opportunities for young people.
100%. And I think I completely agree that it's worrying. And we, as a team, we all, often have a kind of go and read this paper and then we'll regroup. And actually, quite a few of us came back really angry about a few things. Particularly that I think the macro context, we can kind of go, we do have this narrative that you talk about in the paper that you can be anything. There's so many opportunities. We hear the educational attainment and the aspirations. There's this whole thing of, girls, the world is your oyster, but it's not coming through. It's not, even if it's coming through at the top level, there's something underneath that's not really resonating or being authentic. So I think that's one of the main things that we saw that came out from the very beginning of your paper, that there was that contrast between what we say is happening and that hope and the reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I get really frustrated, probably because I want young people, whether they're young men or young women, I want them to have all of the facts. Yeah. I think without the facts, you can't, I don't think anyone can, let alone young men and young women making career decisions. But I think it's important to be aware of all the facts. And I'm okay saying to a young person, you can do whatever you want, you have the potential to do whatever you want, but here's what you need to know. And that's the frustrating thing for me, that we don't let young people know. There's a quote actually in the paper, and if anyone has followed any of Lucas's and my work, we quite often use this quote. And it's from one of the school leaders of the participating schools in the study. And she just happens to be a leader of a high socioeconomic, all-female independent school. And she turned around and she basically said, look, it's okay to talk about employment markets and future jobs and all of that, but we actually don't think that that's relevant for our girls. And it's not something that we consider is relevant to incorporate into their career education or their career decision-making. That quote still stuns me to this day. And I think it's endemic, though, of what is happening is that we say to young people, you can do whatever you like, but we don't continue to tell them of the, even if you're tertiary qualified, there's a recent Australian research showed that 1/3 of graduates, of which young women were more vulnerable than young men, are suffering mismatch. Now, mismatch means that they're either not getting the jobs that is commensurate with their qualifications, or they're not getting the pay and conditions that are commensurate with their qualifications. We don't tell graduates that. We don't tell young people that. We don't tell them that actually, in our recent research at Monash, nearly 80% of young people, again, of which young women were most vulnerable, feel that they're underemployed. Now, whether they're tertiary qualified or not, that's a majority of young people want to work more but can't find the work. These are, whether they're concerning or not is not the point. These are facts about the employment market that I believe that all people should be aware of.
So what stings you about that quote is the kind of just the things will take care of themselves, just aim for what's always been seen as the careers that are safe, the kind of traditional approach.
Yep, absolutely. But also, don't worry about it. Just have your dream and go for it. And there's absolutely no consideration of what happens 5 years down the track, or giving the students, whether they're young women or young men, the resources to navigate those types of facts or employment market conditions or whatever. They're not provided with the skills or the resources to navigate those realities when they're faced.
Could I just pick up on a couple of those points, because I think they're really well made. And you said this was a high SES school where that favourite quote comes from, that shocking quote. I mean, you and you have the Monash emblem in the background, who are associated with a university, and me for my sins sometimes are as well. Is part of that, do you think, a sense of abdication of responsibility by high schools, especially those where they think the majority of the cohort are going to get onto university, just to sort of say, well, that's our job done, you know, basically course selection is pretty much it, and then their careers will just look after themselves somehow on the wind through their university studies? Do you think that may be part of the issue? And the other question I had in relation to this, and again, this is without wanting to threaten your university employment, it has been known occasionally for universities to be very optimistic in their marketing of where their courses will lead and what riches and careers will follow from that, against a backdrop of never having higher enrollments into the university sector. So we're getting this kind of these hyperbolic claims about where people are going to go. And, you know, there's a question as to whether or not the labour market will actually have capacity for all of those highly qualified people, which may lead to that mismatch you're talking about. So quite a bit there in terms of questions to throw at you.
Yeah, let me try and unpack all of it. So the first one, so we'll get straight to like the heart of what I think of careers education. Yeah, I think careers education in secondary schools. So this is a generalisation, right? So I have to caveat by the fact that I think that there are some schools out there that are doing it really brilliantly, right? But in the main, Australian schools, secondary schools, their careers education is focused around destinations. Year 10, so it's senior school subject selection, then it's post-school pathways, yeah? And, you know, most schools, you know, you talk about marketing, most schools rely on pushing their kids into tertiary pathways as part of their marketing campaign. You've all seen the real estate boards up the front of schools that say, here was our median ATAR, here was our median subject score, and some go as far to say, you know, we had X% of students go to university, and then where the others go, they don't really care. So yeah, I think careers education is focused on destinations. I think too, that because of that, that means from a careers education point of view, they're not focused on providing skills and resources and the abilities of students to navigate down the track, to make changes of decisions or to navigate challenges that they might find. And I think it's the same for universities as well. I don't think I'm threatening my employment or yours, Jim, when I say that I think all universities' careers education also suffers some of the same issues, is that they're focused on academic outcomes, they're focused on those success stories where, you know, this student ended up here or this student ended up there, and the pathways of a large majority of students are not highlighted. I mean, earlier this year, I think it was the longitudinal research for graduate outcomes was released in the middle of the year. And we all know that COVID's had a shocking impact on every sector of the employment markets. But even with graduate employment starting to settle, it's still 3 years on average for a graduate to secure the type of employment that is commensurate. That's not saying pay, but that at least is commensurate with the qualification that they've got. Now, that information just never comes to light.
Could you expand a bit about what you mean by the word commensurate? How's that defined?
So if I'm a commerce degree, I'm doing a Bachelor of Commerce and I'm majoring in accounting, then a commensurate career would be me being employed as a graduate accountant that's in line with my qualification. Okay. But I might start in a sales role. That is not commensurate. That's not what the definition of commensurate or match is with the tertiary qualification of being an accountant. So
it's about skill area more than skill level. So it's not about, it's about doing something which is directly relevant to the subject matter they've studied at university. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember data from Donkey's years ago when we did a survey of young people. It's published in 2005 with Joanne Earle from Macquarie University and others. And even then we were finding something like the stats flying around for engineers. I remember 65% of engineers did not go into engineering, and that was 20 years ago. So there's always been this kind of diaspora from subjects that's studied at university. That's not a particularly new phenomenon.
No.
I guess one of the things is, are we, to your point about, are we talking about it and giving them the tools to actually navigate it, is even that, are young people having the chance to think critically about the return on investment? Or are they just blindly going, okay, that's the path? And there's one of the big stats that's in the paper that I'll just share for the audience, which is on that. And we've been talking a lot at the ASIL conference and around our data. And I think the OECD will have another round of this data coming out. But that narrative kind of, where is this concentration of aspirations? And your paper really affirmed that again. And even more so for females. Can you, for everyone, just talk us through this big stat?
So the OECD study, for those of listening to this or listening to the recording, there's been a huge study that first started getting released in 2019, 2020, where tens of thousands of teenagers worldwide had been interviewed and surveyed by the OECD. And part of the study looked at their career aspirations. And the OECD study said that there was a really narrow range of careers that were largely professional in nature and required tertiary qualifications, many of them, to attain that occupation. And our study is pretty well aligned with that. So young women in particular, not only did we notice that their career aspirations were very, very narrow. There's not enough undergraduate medical positions at university in the country to accommodate the number of young women just from these 5 schools that want to do medicine. That's alarming in and of itself, that there's not even, options around that. But anyway, our study showed that the young women in general were focusing on a very narrow range of professional occupations, but also they were very gender oriented as well. So even after all of these years of promoting science and STEM pathways for young women, I mean, you've got our study that is showing, less than 1% of young women are interested in computing or IT. You've got just on 2% looking at engineering, around the same percentage for science and maths oriented careers. And yet they all want to be doctors, lawyers, nurses.
Can you tell me why? I'm worried. Why are the Swiss so unambitious? What's going on here? Because it kind of feeds into this narrowness, doesn't it? Because you're saying, you've used the term ambitious, which I guess has got a slight value judgment attached to it with that label. But you've got the Swiss here saying, 24.6% aspire to managerial or professional working futures, compared to the Australian girls in particular, who were 57.4, if I read your stats correctly, and Australian boys 45.9.
That's right. So that term ambitious is actually a term used by the OECD. So it's their term. It just so happens, we've got nearly 60% of our young women in the OECD study that want professional oriented careers, which is largely the definition of ambitious in the OECD. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with the Swiss.
Because you're talking about linking it to career education in high school, and I wonder whether there's a clue there that do we know something that's going on with the Swiss that we could learn from, or at least try to understand better? I mean, I'm not aware, but I just wondered if you did.
No, it's actually something that we've just so since the papers come out, we've been talking with the OECD and various other countries to actually investigate what is going on in some cases, that we can put some context around some observations that we're making of Australian careers education in particular. So, Jim, you'll have to stay tuned for my insights about the Swiss in that regard.
I can't wait.
I will think that if you think about the perceptions, if we think about what, in the paper, they were defining it as a real career, which I'm taking as is kind of synonymous for ambitious. Whatever values the OECD are putting on that in terms of it equates to professional tertiary, then I think it sounds like the real career concept is related to that. And so it's very socially constructed. So maybe in Switzerland, everyone's there isn't that tension around poverty.
When we put that question in the study, I also wear another hat of being a careers counsellor. So when we put that question, and we use that word deliberately, a real career, to try and ascertain what some of the students thought were a real career. And you're right, Liv, it is socially constructed. You'll often hear Lucas and I talk about, there's this whole sort of thing about you can't be what you can't see. So when parents in particular, and I know that we'll get to the influence of others, but when you've got parents and teachers that are talking about careers that are visible to them, and they're talking about that with their students, and the students or their children are picking up notions of what is real and what is not. I often use this story. I remember I was counselling in a very large, low socioeconomic school here in Victoria. And I remember sitting with a family and a young man, and he wanted to be a film producer, and his parents just couldn't get around the fact that that was not a real career. It was not something that was seen as secure or being able to provide for your family. It was not something that you did. It was a hobby. So I think that there's notions of what's real in terms of what I can see, but also what I can get from that type of career. And then there's other things like hobbies, or, hey, what are you going to do with an arts degree sort of thing? What's the real job coming from that?
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of stories from everyone here related to that and individual student conversations. And I think that's a good point to jump into the influences piece. Some of those topics in the paper around how they're choosing careers and who decides, I think that's the really interesting meat that we should jump into.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, if you've read the paper, you've seen that there's a very strong influence of other people's, and so of other people on the young women's decisions. And so you see that young women are choosing, nearly half of them base their career choices on what other people expect of them, and over half say that they're choosing careers to please others. Yeah, I don't think I need to say anything else except for that.
Well, we had an interesting discussion about this concept of choosing careers to please others last week, and we were talking, and Jim raised the point, is that a bad thing? When we look at cultural differences and community and living in a system. But I'd love, I suspect you were about to jump in, Jim, anyway. What was your question?
Well, that's pretty much it. It's partly for provocative worth, but it's also that point about you know, I don't know, a Western uncritical acceptance of personal self-development at all costs is the most important thing, and you've got to use that expression, you can be whatever you want to be. I actually think that's quite contentious and also potentially damaging, actually, because I don't think people clearly can. I believe in individual differences. I think that's why we're in business as career counselors to some degree, but I think I don't know, that point about doing jobs to please other people. I suppose one question is, and forgive me if I can't find it in the data, the comparison point, how many young men said the same thing?
So it was, so it's not in the data, but it's slightly less. The young women are far more prone to choose careers based on others' expectations or to please others. Now, you are right in a way, Jim, because we've had these conversations ourselves. I mean, if you look at past generations, you know, certainly following in, you know, what your family did, or there might be a family business, or there might be a tradition in the family of pursuing certain careers, and that in and of itself, doing that is not a bad thing, I don't think. We all have to be influenced by different things, and I think it's quite valid to be influenced by your social network. What worries me, though, is when you look at that data in combination with the levels of career anxiety and career stress and the lack of control that the young women feel. And so when you put those associations together, it's those associations that worry me more than anything. When somebody is picking a career to please somebody else, and that is causing them a degree of career stress or career anxiety, or that they feel uncertain whether that career choice is what suits them, or they feel out of control of their own decision-making by making that choice, that's what worries me.
Yeah, I think it's really a rich seam to unpack. I think it's really interesting data. I mean, it's I also can imagine people might do that by default because they can't think of anything themselves. So they'll be, consequently, they're either more vulnerable to other people's influence, or, you know, there's a sort of tendency just to acquiesce and go along. So, I mean, you're right, there's so many different motivations you've identified there. And many of the ones you've talked about are kind of somewhat dysfunctional ones, which are definitely worth addressing. Yeah, I find that interesting. When you said, I'm not trying to get you to test your memory on the spot, but I am interested to know, when you say there's a big difference between the young men and young women in terms of picking to please others or what have you.
No, there's a bit of a difference. So
what sort of percentage points are we talking, like 3 or 4 or 10 or?
You would sit there and say, so nearly half of young women base their career choices. You're looking at maybe a third of young men.
Oh, it's quite a big difference then. I would say that sounds big to me.
Oh yeah, I guess it is when you look at it that way. And over half of the young women choosing to please others, it's around 40% of young men. So again, probably, yeah, it's probably statistically a big difference.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating.
The young men overall just were far more, like, without generalizing the data, the young men were less extreme on all counts in any of the choices that they were making. They appeared more considerate of employment markets and future employability than the young women. They were admittedly less certain, but there were, you know, they weren't as influenced. They didn't experience the degrees of stress that the young women did. So it was like the young women were at the extreme, either positive or negative on things compared to young men.
Okay.
I found that that stat interesting as well, what you're just saying about the employability consideration, that young men were much more likely to be concerned about employability and future prospects of a career choice than young women. And I wonder whether there was any indication, given the any indication that was based on traditional kind of breadwinner roles.
So again, we didn't do a lot of qualitative work in the study. We did do some, particularly around when we were testing the items. And when we were looking at the employability questions, it was really interesting that the all-female schools or the female careers advisors, and again, I'm not trying to sort of generalize here, I'm just looking at the study, but the all-female schools or the female careers advisors had concerns about the number of employability questions in the original list of items, because we went through a process with the schools of getting their feedback on the items before we went into the first survey. So we had an original set of about 75 items that was reduced to 50 items for the first survey, of 51 items. And it was just interesting that the female schools, and we followed up with them, hence we got that wonderful quote from one of them. But the boys' schools, in contrast, didn't have an issue with any of the employability questions, or the single male careers advisor that was in the population. Both that school and that one male careers advisor in a different school, was in a co-ed school, both said that they felt that that information was important for males, and it was because they needed to understand where there was secure work. And that was their words, Liv, that it was seemed like a male issue to be aware of where there was secure work, but not a female one.
Could I just taking you, sounds like a cross-examination, if I could take witness to figure 4, or sounds like
I'm passing, Jim, like I hope I'm not putting
or your thesis examination or something, bring back trauma for you. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, but I'm fascinated when you put numbers in front of me, as Trent will tell you. I do tend to get carried away. Just again, to be provocative, just to give you an opportunity, perhaps, to sort of talk about it more expansively. This is young women's concerns about job and career prospects. Mm-hmm. So the question, I'm looking at this graph, I worry there are too many people going for the same careers and jobs that I want. 26.5%, if I read this correctly, agree with that statement. Could I not say, supposing I was a principal trying to market my school and my brilliant careers service, actually, the vast majority are not concerned about this.
Yeah.
In fact, this is a minority problem. And even the strongest one, which is I worry I won't be employable when I finish, is still less than a third. And in fact, 2/3 of young women do not express those concerns. In fact, 42.2% actively disagree, and the others are neutral. So is this really a big issue, or is, focusing on that end of it, or is there a more optimistic story to tell?
Well, so just to, we did some follow-up discussions with some of the principals after the data was, from my PhD. We provided all of the participating schools with data summaries, data highlights, etc. And I actually sat down with the principal from the high SES female school, of which one of the leaders made the comment, and I was keen to get her view, not only on the views of the school leader that had provided those views, but also just about the data. And she actually gave back to me exactly what you've given. Why should I be worried about this? This is a minority. She said, Why really should I be worried about this? This is a minority. And I guess I sat there and I went, gee, even a minority, there's still a third, right? There's still a third that is, or nearly a third that is worried about that, yeah? And that's a third that is, it's self-report too, right? So that's a third that have self-reported. I don't know, that still makes me worry. Yes, I could absolutely see, but from my perspective, when there's still a third of young women that are self-reporting that they're worried, I'm going to listen to that.
I think I agree with you entirely, and that's kind of why I put the question, to give you an opportunity to express that kind of logic. And I mean, maybe it has, and of course the fascinating thing there is, what's your career development strategy? Is it to target those third who are expressing that, or to shake up the other complacent 2/3 and saying, if you're not worried, you should be.
Well, I think you said it beautifully yourself. As careers advisors, we're about the individual and the differences, right? And so long as we continue to just, I think, apply just, generalized destination-oriented career activities with cohorts, we're not providing individual. We're not dealing with those that don't worry, and we're not dealing with those that do worry. We're just blindly going along somewhere in the middle, just ignoring what, students are actually worried about or feeling. And all we're doing, to be cynical, we're doing personality profile, trait and factor, matching approaches and going, you like this, therefore be an accountant. You like this, therefore be a nurse. And it's just not even remotely focused on how students are feeling about their career choices, what's influencing their career choices, let alone dealing with what those influences may or may not be.
Absolutely. Can I just follow it with one more, and I'll stop dominating.
Sure.
Shut up, but this is great to hear. And it's refreshing and it's brilliant. It's evidence-based with some rigorous data. Have you detected any pushback or any sense of threat from I don't know, people who are charged with with either dispensing the careers education at the chalk face or at the policy level, that any sort of defensiveness that we're doing a good job, and somehow you're being critical? Is that something you've run into those headwinds yet, or?
Well, as you can imagine, we have.
I wouldn't have asked if I hadn't.
And look, and it's, I feel like I can wear two hats here, right? Because I'm being a careers counsellor in a school and in a private context, and I'm sitting on this side of the fence too. Look, I think careers educators are up against it, particularly in school environments. I think they're under-resourced. I think they're marginalised. And I don't think careers education, even with the best intentions of the best careers advisors out there, I don't think careers education is given a shot at being integrated into the mainstream curriculum of senior secondary schools. So I empathise with many, if not all, careers advisors in schools out there, because I think it's super tough, right? But as I put to the conference presentation we did last week to the Australian Association of Graduate Employers, I've also been a director of top 100 companies. I've been an HR director, right? So I've sat in those shoes too. I know what it's like to design and implement graduate recruitment programs and supporting careers education in schools. And I put to them, this is not the 1950s. You turning up to a careers fair with your cake stall, or sitting there doing mock interviews, with schools, and thinking that you are providing quality careers education that actually, as we've been talking about, differentiates between students and students' needs and students' decision-making. It's not good enough anymore to just turn up with your posters and your stall.
Yes.
It's got to get better than that. I think we've all got to get better than that. And part of that is recognising in the system where things are not working, but also where, we use a term in the other project that I'm involved with at Monash, which is around teachers using research in their own practice to improve their practice. And we talk about finding the productive spaces in the system in which we can all work together to try and improve something. Turning careers education on its head, I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere, right? Because as you rightly point out, there'll be resistance, but somehow it's got to be better than this.
Great.
Love what you're saying. And I think one of the productive spaces that we're seeing is also kind of touched on in the report is, you talk about only a third have experiencing stress and anxiety. If we look at the top concerns of principals and teachers, anxiety and stress and well-being, coupled with academic engagement, that if you said we can really shift that third of students who are experiencing real stress and anxiety by doing proper careers education, I think that would suddenly open up, oh, this is a solution, not something else we have to squeeze in. We're really seeing that come through, that understanding, that real authentic hope for the future. And I thought it was really interesting in the paper when you're talking about having an answer, just someone being able to express, you know, what the OECD call career certainty. So being able to express an aspiration does not mean that it's solid. And I think it's such a tick box to be able to go, yes, I've got an idea, but when you underpin it, and I thought that was really interesting, that the career uncertainty and the anxiety that is still there because they're feeling like those experiences they're having are a bit wafer thin. We're not getting into the thinking, teaching them to think about it and design it.
No, you're exactly right. And that's why we deliberately use the sort of the lens of possible selves in the paper. And I love it. It's a simple sort of theoretical frame. And there's nothing wrong with having an idea, hey, I want to be a doctor, right? And I think, Liv, as you and I have spoken in the past, this is what I love about your tools and the way in which you go about supporting the exploration of different career choices through your educational tools. It's okay to sit there and go, hey, I think I want to be a doctor, or I think I want to be a nurse, yeah? But that's the problem that I have with careers education in school. Once I sit there and I say, I want to be a nurse, it's like, tick, right, I can take that student off my list, yeah? They're sorted. Yep, if you want to be a nurse, then you've got to do these BCE subjects or this, you know, pathway through secondary school, done, you're done, yeah? But as you know, they might start to explore nursing or explore medicine and go, oh my God, I mean, I know I did when I was young. I actually wanted to be a doctor and kept passing out at the sight of blood. I mean, you know, you've got to explore these things and determine, is that really what I want to do? Or maybe it doesn't look like being a doctor. It actually looks like being a psychologist because I don't like the sight of blood or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that exploration that I don't think that the schools do enough of, that help the students, help the young people work through their possible selves, because it's good to have possible selves. It's just not good for that to be the end of it.
Absolutely. I think one of the constraints is, you know, the first formal conversations are often right when those high stakes decisions have to be made. So the first answer is kind of the next step, and it's a high stakes investment next step. Either it's a subject choice, they're solid, they're concrete ones, so you're not having the time to play with these possible selves. Yep. So I think there's a structural issue as well, finding the time and space in the curriculum, but also earlier.
Yeah, agree.
Yes, I'd love to hear. I know everyone's probably got lots of questions. I think we've got lots of school careers advisors, about other people from non-school environments as well on the call. So please either unmute yourselves and jump in and ask a question, or you feel free to use the chat. So where to from here while we're waiting for the questions?
Well, there's a couple of avenues, but I guess the one that excites me is we're looking at, we're starting to look at, we want to do some longitudinal research, particularly around the career anxiety and the stress, and how, well, to what extent and how young women take that career anxiety and career stress through different milestones, through different parts of their journey, through tertiary education, then into graduate employment. We want to start looking at what points and how, at what points in their journey, certain types of career education are important for them to, you know, with the aim that career anxiety and the stress is probably the thing at this stage that I want to try and address. Yeah.
And if you think about practical steps within a school setting, this cohort was end of high school. It feels like even the first thing might be a practical thing for a careers educator to be doing. What would you say is the most important thing that you could do in a simple way?
And they're in secondary school?
Yeah.
Start in year 7 would be the first one. Start helping them to explore, to go, hey, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a firefighter, and help them to start exploring what that means, what that looks like. Do you like it? You can do very simple, interest and likes and dislikes things, even with young year 7 and year 8 students. I would like to see more differentiated careers education. In that, I would like, schools to look at ways to have conversations with students in year 7 and 8 and start to engage families. Now, I know it's hard to engage families, particularly if you're in a low socioeconomic environment where parents might not be able to speak English, they might be working shift work, they might not be engaged with the school community, there might not even be parents, there might be a carer or a guardian situation. I know it's extremely difficult to engage students' social network, but somehow schools have got to work to better inform those social networks about what is out there and to start helping them have conversations with their students or with their children in their home environment. The worst thing that can happen to kids is where all the parts of the system are disconnected. So you might have an employer or an alumni student come in, inspire a student about, hey, girls, you can be carpenters, let's say. And that young woman or young student goes home, says, hey, we had this great talk on carpentry, and all it takes is, a parent or a guardian or a carer to go, what do you want to do that for?
That's not a real
job. And then it all falls apart. So they're the sorts of things that I would like to start seeing in schools, albeit that it's hard, but I think we need to have conversations from a system perspective about how we can do this and how we can do it earlier.
Yeah,
I think that's a brilliant direction to go in. Earlier in my career, I did a lot of work on stress and supervised quite a few PhDs in occupational stress and wrote a book on it before I got known for career development work. One thing that's caught my eye, and I think it's interesting, we've got Trent on the line who's been doing some doctoral work on opportunity awareness. And is that of those respondents who believe that they had missed opportunities to maximize their potential to achieve the career they wanted, nearly half felt down or worried about selecting a career. We talk a lot in the Chaos Careers about opportunity awareness, or we call it luck readiness, and developing those skills, and we believe they are skills that are teachable. And we think things like Become is actually teaching people how to spot opportunities and how to explore and to do that. I think it's a really fruitful line of inquiry. And just on that one sentence, that one bit of data you've got there, there looks to me a potential key to addressing part of that, not all of it, but part of that career anxiety and career stress that you're talking about. So I think that's really exciting.
I agree. And I think the corresponding stat that goes with that is the percentage. I can't remember exactly the percentage, but the percentage of young women that feel that they're doing activities or undertaking things without any purpose or sense of direction. And both of those, when you put it together, point exactly to where you're going, is that opportunity awareness of things come along that you might not be aware that can help, or that can inform you or influence you. And it's a very important. Thanks, Trent. Anytime you want to follow up, please do so. But yeah, no, those two stats, those corresponding stats, I think are really interesting from that perspective.
Absolutely.
There are a couple of questions come through. One was about the role of social media in influencing career choice, aspirations, and confidence. I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see the next round of OECD, the PISA data that comes out this time, and see whether there's been a shift in the last few years. But I mean, even we had a discussion recently about the 2000 to 2018 data, and obviously the internet and the availability of information has exploded in those years, yet, including social media, yet the concentration of careers has actually narrowed. So if anything, it's creating more concentration at the moment. We haven't seen influencers come through on the top 10 yet. But I'd love, yeah, what's your thoughts, Jo? I know it's not in the data, is it?
So there's a bit of a celebrity orientation, particularly with the young men. So the way that the data was set up, and it hasn't been reported in this paper, was the participating students had to nominate a career if they wanted to. It was an open text field. And from that open text field, we quite often they didn't just go nurse sometimes. They, in quite a number of cases, they gave us a bit of a story, yeah. But there's definitely a celebrity influence, I would say, on both the girls and the boys, more from the boys in terms of professional sportsmen. You've got a very high percentage of the young boys believing that they can be a professional sportsman or what they call a media star. So that's definitely coming through in the data. We just haven't reported it here. But in terms of social media, this is, again, the pushback that we've had so far from schools or organisations that work with schools. The issue of using technology in schools around investigating careers. So it might be from the point of view of low socioeconomic schools, that the students don't have laptops, or the internet might not be supportive of them doing things. So even though that there's a lot of really good resources out there, like My Future's had a huge overhaul, and there's other really good resources, schools are not availing themselves of that. And the second thing is their phone policy within schools, that even if you constructed a career activity, we tried to construct a career activity for a range of schools recently that was based on social media, and no, that got shot down. So I don't mind social media. I think it's important to incorporate it. It's a lived experience for young people. So the fact that we're not incorporating social media into the influence and the discussions that we're having with young people around their career choices, I find odd. I find it just perpetuating an out of date framework or context to conversations, as if this just doesn't exist. So I have issues with that. But secondly, I think we could use it as a positive way of starting conversations.
I saw a really interesting comment the other day. I was on there was a big Twitter thread about learner profiles and the best tools to use, and everyone was struggling to build learner profiles. And I think, I'm going to misattribute it, I think it was Cameron Patterson who said, I've just realized we've got LinkedIn. What are we doing? Like, the whole rest of the world use and rely on LinkedIn.
Yep.
What are we doing? It was such a, like, hit me in the face, of course, obvious point. But there's a couple more questions here that I need to love to take. One is about part-time jobs, and the other one is about the role of work experience. Sorry, Jim, did you want to jump in there?
I was just going to read them, but they've done it.
So no, we didn't have any data on kids who had part-time jobs whilst at school at the time of the study. That would have been fascinating, wouldn't it? Do they do better due to learning some basic skills? Well, any of the current research or existing research that's out there where researchers have looked at the influence of work experience, internships, volunteer. I mean, yes, I don't know about doing better. I don't know what doing better actually means. I think it's Vanessa that posed that. What do you mean by doing better? Is she online? She's gone.
Yeah, the muted and camera off.
So yeah, confidence in the workplace. Oh, I'm not sure. We haven't tracked through to the workplace. I mean, you know, Jim, you're probably in a better position, but most of the existing Australian studies that you can see is that when you're developing those types of resources through extracurricular activities or work experience, you do develop a resource bank, if you like, that does help you with your employability and potentially future employment.
It's a really interesting one. I was just frantically trying to dig up a paper from the Flintstone era when myself and Joelle were doing work on this, and Joanne Earl did some of her PhD research on this. And I don't want to word her up and get this wrong. We published it, and I've got a feeling she found that work experience in her sample did not have a significant impact on measures like career maturity, you know, that old Donald Super kind of construct, but I could be wrong. So yeah, I mean, but it does bring up interesting equity issues, doesn't it, this one, because some people are obliged to work at school to help support the family or support themselves to have some money to do other activities. So the work experience could have an indirect career effect by giving them the money to afford to go off to explore stuff which ultimately they want to pursue as a vocation. It may have a direct positive impact that they get exposed to work they kind of like, or work that they don't like, and it helps them rule out things that they really don't want to go near again. But there's also an equity issue here that clearly, you know, if you come from a high socioeconomic status kind of group, then the chances of pottering off into your mother's colleagues' business to swan around doing stuff, meeting lots of interesting people, or you know, or to do hospitality in the bird cage in Melbourne and meet a bunch of people, is probably different depending on your socioeconomic background. Totally. So if you try to kind of systematize that in any kind of way, it's the same with work experiences. You see it, the kids that end up doing wonderful work experience because they leverage the parents' connections, and those poor kids who kind of end up going to the library and sort of putting stickers on books because they haven't got those networks.
Yeah. The jury's out for me on work experience, as in the form that it has traditionally existed, which is a week of work experience somewhere. The jury's out for me on that. Intuitively, I wouldn't have thought that would have much impact, you know, for a whole range of reasons, some of which you talked about, Jim, but it's more the part-time work experience, or the sort of the regular volunteering experience, or even, you know, I quite often say that those home duties, what concerns me again about careers education, or even to your opportunity awareness, we don't help kids realize that even when let's say they're in a low socioeconomic environment and their parents are doing shift work, and so the older child is looking after the younger children and doing home duties, there's some wonderful experience and wonderful skill development that they're getting through there, but often that's not celebrated or acknowledged, and the student feels that they're missing out on things without realizing that they've got a wealth of maturity and skills that, you know, their you know, wealthier counterparts, you know, may not have because they haven't been in that situation. So
yeah, I completely
it's that
agree.
whole opportunity awareness that I love that, Jim. I think that's a real thing to focus on.
Yeah. I'm really conscious of time. I think we could sit and chat all evening. But I'd love to have a follow-up. But I think Sarah's just said, yeah, building self-efficacy and self-confidence is absolutely key. And I think that's to the critical thinking, how to think about it, how to spot opportunities, how to make them work for you. I think all of that is what we're trying to build, that authentic foundation to these career decisions. So Jo, thank you so much for doing the work in the first place and coming to chat to us about it. It's really exciting. I think it's really valuable work, and I hope you have the chance to shift people to focus more on it. I'm sure your with the link to the paper is there in the chat, and I'm sure Jo will be happy to follow up, and we will definitely continue to share and support your work.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me, Liv, and I'm sorry it took so long to come, but I'd love to come back. That was super fun. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, that was fantastic.
Thanks.
Good work.
Thanks, everyone.